The morning my daughter sat across from me with a folder of papers and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, I already knew what was inside. I had known for 3 weeks. I just hadn't told her that. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am 68 years old. I worked 31 years as a registered nurse. I held the hands of people in their final hours. I calculated medication dosages in the middle of the night while running on 3 hours of sleep and cold coffee. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed, and I managed every bill, every school form, every difficult conversation that came with doing that. My mind is sharp. My memory is good. I know the difference between a kind suggestion and a slow takeover. I just chose for a while to pretend I didn't. My daughter's name is Claire. She is 41 years old and lives about 20 minutes from me with her husband, Derek, who sells commercial real estate and has strong opinions about everything except the things he actually knows about. They have been married 11 years. I have tried, sincerely tried, to like him. There are moments when I almost do. Claire started calling more frequently about 2 years ago, after I retired. At first it felt loving. She would stop by on Saturdays with pastries from the bakery near her house, and we would sit on the back porch and drink coffee and watch the birds at the feeder I had hung from the oak tree. Those mornings were good. I believed they meant something. Then the questions started changing. Mom, do you have someone who helps you with your finances? I told her I managed my own finances, as I had for decades. I just mean, it can get complicated. Derek knows a guy. I said I was fine. A few weeks later, Mom, have you thought about what happens if something happens to you, like with the house and everything? I told her I had a will. An attorney drafted it 7 years ago. Everything was in order. Right, but wills can be contested. There are better ways to structure things. I noticed the word structure. I filed it away. Then, one evening in early October, Claire and Derek came for dinner. I had made pot roast, which is Derek's favorite, and I remember thinking that was probably intentional on his part, timing the conversation for a night when I'd made an effort. After we ate, while I was still at the table with my wine, Derek leaned back in his chair and said, casually, the way people say things they have rehearsed to sound casual, we've been talking to an estate attorney. There are some things you should think about putting in place now, while everything is straightforward. Before it gets complicated. I asked him what he meant by complicated. He looked at Claire. She picked up the thread immediately, the way I could tell they had practiced. Mom, we just want to make sure you're protected. If anything ever happened where you couldn't make decisions for yourself medically, financially, we want to be able to help. It makes sense to give us power of attorney now. It's just paperwork. It doesn't change anything. I looked at my daughter across the table. The candle between us was burning low. Outside, the wind was moving through the oak tree. I said, let me think about it. She smiled. And it was the same smile from the folder. Morning, warm on the surface, relieved underneath. Here is what I did not say at that dinner table. I had already spoken to my neighbor Barbara the week before, and Barbara, whose first husband had been an estate attorney before he died, had said to me over the fence while we were both raking leaves, has Claire been bringing up power of attorney? And when I said yes, Barbara had set down her rake and looked at me with a directness I have always appreciated in her and said, get yourself to an attorney before you sign a single thing, a real one. Not whoever they're sending you to. I had been turning that over ever since. I did not sleep well that night after the pot roast dinner. I lay in the bed I had shared with my husband for 22 years. In the house we bought together in 1989. And I stared at the ceiling and thought about what it meant that my daughter's relief, when I said I'd think about it, looked so much like getting away with something. The next morning, I called an attorney, not the one Derek had mentioned. I found one on my own, a woman named Patricia, who specialized in elder law and estate planning, and I made an appointment for the following Thursday and told no one. What I learned in that appointment changed everything. Patricia sat across from me in her office with my documents, my existing will, my account statements, the deed to my house, and she walked me through what a power of attorney actually meant in the hands of someone whose interests might not align with mine. She explained how assets could be moved. She explained the difference between the POA Claire was describing and a limited, carefully scoped version. She explained that my existing will had a gap, a small but significant one that left my investment accounts outside the estate structure, which meant they would pass directly to the beneficiary listed on each account. I sat very still while she told me that. Then I asked her what we needed to do. We met 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. By the second week of November, my beneficiary designations had been updated on every account. My will had been revised. The house had been placed into a revocable living trust with terms I understood completely and had chosen deliberately. Patricia had also drafted a very specific, very limited healthcare directive. Not a blanket power of attorney, but a document that named a trusted friend, my college roommate Judith, who lives in Asheville, as my healthcare proxy in the specific and narrow circumstance of my being incapacitated. Not Claire. Not Derek. I did not tell Claire any of this. I know how that sounds. I know a daughter reading this might think it sounds cold or secretive or like I was punishing her for something she hadn't fully done yet. But here is the thing about being a nurse for 30 years. You learn to read the difference between someone who is worried about you and someone who is worried about what happens to your things. The first kind asks how you're sleeping. The second kind asks about your accounts. Claire had not asked how I was sleeping in quite some time. The folder arrived on a Friday afternoon. Claire called that morning to say she and Derek wanted to stop by, that they had some documents for me to look over, that it would only take a few minutes. I said, of course, come for coffee. I'll have the good kind ready. She sounded pleased, almost girlish, and that sound was the hardest part of the whole thing to sit with. They arrived at 2 o'clock. Derek was carrying a leather portfolio. Claire was carrying a bakery box, the pastries from the place near her house, the same ones from the good Saturday mornings. I looked at the box and felt something move through me that I won't try to name. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured coffee. Derek opened the portfolio and took out a set of documents, neatly organized, tabbed with those small colored sticky notes that are meant to show you where to sign. We worked with an attorney, Claire said. She was watching me carefully. Derek's contact. I looked at the top page. It was a durable power of attorney, broad in scope, naming Claire and Derek jointly as my agents, with authority over financial decisions, property transactions, and I turned to the next page, the ability to make gifts of my assets on my behalf. To themselves, to each other. I turned another page. There was a document about the house. A deed transfer into a family trust. Their trust, not the one Patricia had set up for me. I put the pages down on the table. Derek said, "It's really just protective. Nothing changes day to day." I looked at my daughter. She was holding her coffee cup in both hands and watching me with an expression I recognized from when she was young and had done something she wasn't sure I'd found out about yet. There was hope in it. There was the early stages of guilt. I said, "I want to show you both something." I got up and walked to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen where I keep my important papers. I took out a manila envelope and brought it back to the table and set it down between the bakery box and Derek's leather portfolio. I opened it and took out the trust documents Patricia had drawn up. I laid them on the table. Then I took out the updated beneficiary confirmation letters from each financial institution, my brokerage, my IRA, the account that had been in my husband's name for years, and that was now, properly, directed exactly where I intended. Then I took out the new healthcare directive. I laid everything out flat so they could both see it. Neither of them spoke. I said, "I had my own attorney. I've had her for 6 weeks. Everything has already been handled. I kept my voice even, the way I used to keep it even in the hospital when I had to tell a family something they didn't want to hear. The house is in a trust I control entirely, and the terms are mine. The accounts all have correct beneficiaries now. I have a healthcare directive with someone I trust. It is all done." Claire set down her coffee cup. She said, "Mom, I'm not angry," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not yelling. I'm not accusing you of anything out loud." I folded my hands on the table. "But I need you to hear me say this directly. I know what those documents were." I nodded toward the portfolio. "I know what the gift provisions meant. I know what a joint POA with property transfer authority looks like when two people are named together and one of them sells real estate for a living." Derek made a sound. I looked at him, and he stopped making it. "I built this life," I said. "I worked 31 years. I paid this mortgage alone for 9 years after your father died." I was looking at Claire now. "I am not confused. I am not declining. I am not a problem to be managed." I paused. "I am your mother, and I am telling you that I handled this myself. I handled it correctly. And the only reason we are having this conversation is because I thought you deserved to know that I know." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. Claire's eyes had filled. I had expected that. I had thought about it many times in the 6 weeks I was meeting with Patricia, how this moment would feel, whether it would break me or whether I would be able to hold it steadily. I had decided I would hold it steadily. Not because I didn't love her. I love her completely. But because love is not the same as surrender, and she needed to understand that about me. She said, "We were just trying to protect you." I said, "I know you believe that." Derek reached over and closed the leather portfolio. I watched him do it. He did not say anything else, and I was grateful for that, because if he had said anything else, I am not sure I would have been as quiet about it. They left about 20 minutes later. Claire hugged me at the door, longer than usual. I let her. I held her back. She is still my daughter. That doesn't change. But I did not apologize, and I did not soften it. And when I closed the door and stood in my front hall alone, I felt something I had not felt in 2 years. I felt like myself again. I called Patricia from the kitchen and told her what had happened. She said, "Good for you." Just that. It was enough. I called Judith in Asheville, and we talked for an hour. She is the healthcare proxy now. She knows what my wishes are. I wrote them down for her, in plain language, the way I always wrote things as a nurse, clear, specific, without room for interpretation. She said, "I've got you." I knew she meant it. I called Barbara over the fence the next morning and told her everything while we both stood in the yard with our coffee. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about her. And when I finished, she said, "You did exactly right." She said it the way someone says something true. There are things I want to say to anyone who is where I was 2 years ago, before the questions started and the Saturday mornings became something other than what I'd thought they were. First, your instincts are correct. When something feels like it is drifting in a direction you did not choose, there is a difference between a family member who is worried about you and a family member who is worried about what you have. The first one asks how you feel. The second one keeps circling back to the paperwork. Second, find your own attorney. Not theirs, yours. Someone who works in elder law, who knows the difference between a document that protects you and a document that protects them. Ask your own questions. Read everything. If you need to read it 3 times, read it 3 times. You have that right. Third, you do not have to explain yourself in the moment. You do not have to argue across a table with sticky-tabbed documents in front of you. Preparation is quieter than confrontation, and it is much more effective. By the time Claire sat down at my table with that portfolio, there was nothing to contest. Everything was already done. Everything was already mine. I want to tell you what the hardest part was. It was not the attorney's office. It was not the conversation with Claire and Derek. It was not even the moment I picked up the phone that first morning to make the appointment. The hardest part was the 6 weeks in between, knowing what I knew and watching my daughter come over on a Saturday with pastries and smile at me across the table while I drank my coffee and said nothing. Holding something that heavy in silence takes a kind of energy I hadn't asked for. But I reminded myself, every one of those Saturdays, that I had spent 31 years staying calm in rooms where things were falling apart. I knew how to wait. I knew how to prepare. I knew how to hold my ground without broadcasting that I was doing it. That, in the end, is what they underestimated. Not my stubbornness. Not my anger. My patience. I still have the bakery box. I put the pastries in the freezer the night Claire and Derek left. Croissants keep surprisingly well if you wrap them right. I had one this morning with my coffee, standing at the back door, and watching the late November light come through the oak tree. The bird feeder was empty, so I went out in my coat and filled it. The sparrows came back inside of 5 minutes. They always do. My house is still my house. My life is still my life. My decisions are still mine. Every single one of them. That is the whole story. That is all I need it to be.